Hello and welcome to today's Patreon tutorial. Now for today I'm just going to look at bird wings, and I'm going to do a very general bird wing here because birds come in all different shapes and sizes, and because of that, the variety of their wing shapes is actually very broad. Now I won't go into too much detail about the different types of wings today, but I encourage you to look up stuff like an albatross and compare an albatross to, say, an eagle, and look at how their wings are different. They're basically built for different types of flying. You'll have a albatross, which is basically consistent soaring over the sea, and even though, say, eagles soar as well, there's a different kind of soaring, but I do encourage you to have a look and compare different bird species together. But first, what we're going to do is we're just going to go over the very general structure of a typical bird wing. So we've got different types of feathers. We've got primary feathers, secondary feathers, we've got converts, we've got marginal converts, and basically they can all be built up in the same kind of way, depending on your bird species, obviously. So grab your reference and we'll get started today. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw a very simple, straightforward bird wing. What I like to start off with is drawing essentially the primary feathers. So the primary feathers on a bird's wing are all the feathers that connect to basically the hand joint. So we'll go into a little bit about the anatomy of a bird wing as well, but we'll start off with the very basic structure. So I always start, when I'm drawing a bird in flight, with a sort of triangle shape, which is where the primary feathers are going to be. So this will be the kind of first part of the primary feather, which is the kind of main edge here. I'm not going to go into drawing every little feather in detail because we're just going to build up the basic structure first. But I always start with a triangle shape. Now this is where the primary feathers will fall. Obviously they'll probably go out slightly out the outside, but it's just you need a simple triangle shape to kind of get the structure down. So this is kind of where the bird's wrist joint will be. So that's where all the primary feathers come off here. Now we'll draw where the secondary feathers come in. Now that's more of a longer rectangle-y shape, but we're keeping it nice and rounded because obviously bird wings are round. There's not really any straight edges in nature, but we'll do the rounded edge here for the base of the feathers. Now the secondary feathers attach pretty much from the forearm through to where the elbow and the humerus are. So this is where the skeleton wing is, for example, and the secondary feathers will come in like this. Now obviously this is where the elbow is, where the forearm is, where the humerus is. There's always tissue that comes from the wrist to the shoulder. This is where our shoulder is. I'm just going to connect that up with a nice loose line because there's lots of tendons, there's lots of tissue here that keeps everything well connected, nice and elastic, and helps the bird to basically flap its wing. Now on top of our primary feathers, we have another layer of feathers called the primary converts. So I'm just going to draw in basically a smaller triangle here. Again, this is a very generalized wing shape. This isn't specific to any species. I'm just giving you an idea. And you can look into this whenever you look at your next reference of a bird. You can get an idea of where the feathers lie based on this kind of understanding. So we also have our primary converts. We also have our secondary converts. So primary feathers, primary converts, secondary feathers, secondary converts. And over the top of those again, we also have our marginal converts. So we have essentially 3 layers of feathers. This is a top view. It's slightly different on the bottom view, but for the top view of the feathers, we have 3 layers of feathers. And then over the top of our primary converts, we have essentially what becomes the bird's thumb feathers. And they're called the alula. And they go over the top, basically where the wrist is actually. So just to give you an idea. Now, what I tend to do here, so I'm keeping the structure very simple at the minute, but I'm going to just draw in where I want the feathers to kind of go. Just keeping it nice and simple. So the feathers all come from the outside edge and they meet basically, say we'll give an abstract point here, an arbitrary point here. So they all kind of go up and connect to that one point. So just something to bear in mind. It's more of an arbitrary area here, so that they all extend from very similar points. And they give you this flow of feathers. The same can be said for our primary converts. I'll just do a very loose thing here, and I'll go over with the black pen in a minute. So the red is just for me to just get a base sketch down. You get an idea that they all extend from a very similar point, and it applies basically when the wrist is, say, extended or contracted. The feathers overlap each other, and when they're extended, they all obviously are spread like this. When they're contracted, they kind of close over and overlap each other. So that's just something to bear in mind when you're drawing your wings. Now for your primary feathers, so I'm just going to draw like this. Just paying attention to the reference and where the curve of the feathers are. You'll find that the feathers closer to the body may be overlapping the ones further out. So actually, even though I've drawn them like this, it's just for me to bear in mind that actually where the top of the feather is visible versus where the bottom of the feather is hidden underneath the other feathers. I'm just giving a very gentle curving motion here. So that we have lots of little feathers up here called the medial converts, that they all kind of overlap each other, but we'll just do a little squiggle there. So for this reference as well, so we have our primary, secondary, we also have tertiary feathers, but they can be called scapulars as well, and they are the ones that kind of fill the gap between the wing and the body, so they just kind of overlap each other. I'm not going to go into too much detail. So you can see where I've done the primary, which is a nice triangle, the secondaries, which is kind of a rectangle, the scapula can be a nice thinner triangle here, and then we've got a few extra layers for the converts as well. So now I'm just going to fill in using a black pen so you can get a neater idea of what these feathers look like. Now I'm going to draw over the alula first. So this is where the thumb of the bird is. And you'll probably have maybe 2 or 3, maybe a few extra feathers here. I'm just going to draw over the top of them. So overlapping there. Now I'm going to fill in the converts. So I'm just paying attention to where I want the edge of the wing to be. And bearing in mind that these feathers are probably going to be overlapping this one. I'm just going to draw each one, maybe just the edge in first to get an idea of where the feathers are going to lie. Now this isn't a perfect example because it's not a specific wing type. This is all kind of drawn from my knowledge that I have. I'm just drawing in the outer edge first. So you can see that I've already kind of ignored the sketch underneath, but that sketch underneath was just to get an idea of what the feathers look like. But now I can draw in my individual feathers, just to get an idea. So these are our secondary converts for our bird. I'm also going to extend this bit of tissue from the wrist area. It curves all the way up. So I'm keeping it kind of sketchy, but you can be neater than this if you want. I like being quite loose in my sketches. So that's basically, you know, the tissue that connects the wrist to the shoulder. That'll be full. It's quite squishy. I think if you've ever felt a bird's wing, there's lots of kind of loose tissue here, but that's full of tendons. That basically connects those joints and makes the flapping much more easy. And while I'm here, I'm just going to fill in our medial converts, or marginal converts, sorry, I think I misspoke earlier. And again, just going to keep it simple. Now, there's lots of smaller feathers here, and I think that's why they're called marginals, because there's just so many of them. There's not a very distinct layer, but I'm just going to pop in where all these feathers would be. And then fill in the gap, sort of give more a specific line of where these marginal converts end. Now I'm going to draw in my secondary feathers. So again, paying attention to which ones overlap which. Completely ignoring my sketch because I'm good like that. But just giving you an idea. Then as you get to these feathers, you may find they overlap a bit more like that, and smaller feathers may kind of be over the top. So that's where our secondary and primary convert feathers are. Now, we'll do our primary feathers. Find that the edge is nice and curved. Again, it depends on the species of the bird, so do be aware of that when you're sketching, depending on what bird you're sketching. If you want to be accurate, of course. Obviously, artistic license is allowed. As you're an artist, you're allowed to play with it and make it how you want to make it. There's no rules. But for accuracy's sake, just pay sort of attention to what type of bird wing you are drawing. These are quite big feathers. They're probably the largest feathers, apart from, say, tail feathers. You'll probably find that the primaries are some of the bigger feathers on a bird. And I'm just going to draw in my secondaries as well, just for a general idea of where they go. And then you'll have the scapulars like that. And that's your very basic kind of bird wing. So we can apply this kind of understanding of where the primaries and the secondaries are to a bird's wing that is closed. Obviously this is extended. This is a bird in flight, or a bird that's stretching its wings. But we can look at how the feathers work when they're overlapping each other when a bird's got its wing closed. So again, look at references where you're struggling, but you might find that drawing closed wings can be a bit of a challenge until you understand what part of the wing is what. So I tend to start off, we'll just start off with a very basic, this is what a closed wing looks like. Obviously, it's a bit more detailed than that. But, so I'm going to go back in with my red pen because I think that's better. You'll find that the bird's wing goes from here's the shoulder, the elbow folds in down here, the wrist and the forearm comes up here, and the wrist is up here. So actually, this is how a bird's wing looks like when it's folded. So if you apply what we said here, so the primary feathers are going to be attached to the wrist joint. Obviously, they're going to overlap each other a bit more. So actually, what you're going to see is a potentially more sort of tighter triangle shape. But all our feathers are going to overlap each other, which we'll come into in a minute. So you got your wrist, your elbow, your shoulder. Now, for the secondary feathers, so say the primary feathers have connected up to here. The secondary feathers, they're going to overlap pretty much straight away over the top of this. So we're going to draw in our secondary feathers here. So it's not completely accurate, but obviously you got this shape here, which is where the primary feathers are. They're going to be underneath our secondary feathers because you can see how everything overlaps each other. So our primary feathers are underneath, our secondary feathers are overlapped, and then you'll get where the converts and stuff are. But the primary converts are going to be basically underneath your secondary feathers, And then your secondary converts are going to come over the top here as well. So you basically get all these layers of feathers, but they're all scrunched up. And then you'll get your scapulars that come along here. That looks like a right mess, and I don't blame you. But now you can kind of get an idea for what the basic structure is. You can kind of build up the wing with that knowledge. So again, make sure you're using your reference. What I like to do when I'm drawing a closed wing is actually start with the feathers that are on the nearest to the body, because those are the ones that are going to be more visible. They're the ones that are going to be on top. So what I'm going to do, you don't tend to get much detail. You just get like a whole bunch of little feathers here, which we'll take into account. So this is where these are going to be basically our marginal converts, and they're all going to come in and they're going to be overlapping each other. Very simple, very, very, very simple. So this is where all our marginal converts are. They've compressed into this little area here. Now, our secondary converts are going to be the ones that are here. So you'll find that the secondary converts are all going to be overlapping each other, be much closer together. But you might even find that these aren't as visible because the scapular and the secondary feathers are more visible. But we're just going to use this as an example. So these are our secondary converts. Our secondary feathers in all, you're probably only going to see the ones that are here. And the rest of them are going to be barely visible because they're actually going to be hidden underneath that feather there. So they fill up this space that I've drawn here, the red space here. But the only one you can see in its entirety are pretty much the ones close to the body, because they're all going to be hidden underneath. And then your alula, probably barely even see that, but you might be able to see a few feathers here. Again, just overlapping each other. And then when it comes down to the primary feathers, again, they're going to be covering each other quite significantly. So maybe the only primary feather you're going to see is going to be the one closest to the fold here. The rest of them, they're just going to be lines, really. They're not going to be anything more than that. So I know this is a mess, and I'll do a more kind of visible one in a moment. If I just go over that, I can make it stand out a bit more. And perhaps I'll do a bit of shading with a pen or something. That might help. Cool. So, we've got our lulas. We've got our marginal converts. We've got our secondary converts, which are these ones here. Our secondary feathers, which are these ones here. Primaries. Barely even see any of the converts because they all tuck away. Those might even be the primary converts and the lulas up here. And then this is our primary feathers. So I'm going to put some colour on that so that you can see it better. Comparison. Your marginal converts are going to be up here. I'll do in yellow. Those are your marginal converts. And then the marginal converts here are these ones here. Cool. And we're going to have our secondary converts. These ones here. And they're going to be these ones here. Going to have our secondary feathers, which I'll do here in red. And these are your secondaries here. Now we've got our lula, which is basically where the thumb is. Probably only this bit here for the alula. We'll have our primary converts. primary converts. Again, not very visible. You have your primary feathers. Cool, I hope that makes a bit more sense. Now, so these are very generalized bird wings, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw, we'll focus on one specific type of bird here. And I'll go through what the purposes of that particular bird is. I do encourage you to go out and have a look at different bird species and to get an idea of what different wings do different roles. But we'll have a look, and I'll just do a sketch here and we have a look at maybe shading with a ballpoint pen. We'll have a play. We'll have a play for the last little bit of the tutorial. Right, so what I've decided to do is I'm going to draw a pigeon wing. Now, pigeons, if you don't know this already, but believe it or not, pigeons are actually evolved for speed. So they have this very interesting wing shape, which is designed to help them fly really quickly. And I'm going to draw that one here as a good example. So the difference between, perhaps this more general bird wing and a pigeon wing is that pigeons have very long primary feathers. So if I start off with the basic wing structure, so this is where our shoulder is up to our wrist. They have quite a short secondary feather area. So this is where our wrist is. They are very long primary feathers. Now, this is kind of be our secondary feather area. And this line kind of goes up and this line of feathers just continues straight up pretty much. And this is our very basic wing shape. So it's at a different angle to these, but we have where our secondary feathers are. Our secondary converts kind of come down like this. I am using a reference, just so you know. But our you can see the secondary converts come much further down to where the secondary feathers are. So there's actually not much of the secondary feathers left visible. And then we have our marginal converts as well, like this. Then we have our lula feathers, which is essentially the thumb joint. Just like that. And then our secondary converts come like this. Sorry, our primary converts, that was our primary converts. This is our secondary converts. Come in like that. And the scapular feathers are here. You don't really get much visible when it comes to the marginal converts. I'm not going to be hyper detailed, but this is where our marginal converts are. Now, the primary feathers, they're quite long in comparison to the wing. They've got very narrow but long wings. Have pigeons. So I'm just kind of going by my reference here. Take into account the shape of the feathers themselves, because that can have an effect on the way that I'm drawing. Cool, so you can see as I was building that up, I did the very similar structure here. I had where the secondary feathers are, the primary feathers, you have your lula feathers, your marginal converts, your secondary converts, secondaries, your primary converts. Cool, and this is from a pigeon. I love pigeons, I think they're really daft. No, I might even draw his little face in here. Anyway, we're not focusing on that, we're focusing on wings. So if this is where the head is, and then we're not going to worry about where the other wing placement is, we're just focusing entirely on the structure. I'm going to go in, I'm going to add detail, and I'm going to shade as well with my pen, because I think this is a good example of good opportunity to show you pen shading, which I'll do for another tutorial some other time. So what I'm doing with my ballpoint pen is I'm very lightly going over the same area again and again to make the detail stand out. And this is where our Alula feathers are. And our marginal convex. I think for clarity, maybe I'll just repeat what the types of feathers are as I'm going. So you can see where the edge of the marginal converts are. There's not much else. Especially this reference, there's very little detail. You can't actually see the individual feathers because they all just kind of squish into each other. And we'll do our primary converts. So again, whilst I'm doing this, I'm just checking my reference as I go. So obviously I'm doing specifically a pigeon's feather, pigeon's wing as a reference. That's our primary converts, and they kind of blend fairly quickly into our secondary converts here. So the curve is on the outside here, and they go around. And that's how you can kind of define the feathers and see that they're overlapping each other. So it's a super narrow wing. We'll do our primary feathers while we're here. So I really haven't gone into detail about the actual feathers as well. Obviously you get the shaft of the feather and you get the bristles, but we're not going to worry about that for this point. So those are our primaries. Now we'll just do a very simplified version of our secondaries as well. I'll do a very light bit of shading just to give you an example. So the shadow of this bird is here, so I'm just going to draw the edge of where the shadow is. I'm just going to throw in some shadow, some shade, slightly heavier pressing with the pen. The wonderful thing about these pens is that you can do quite a lot with them, and I'll go into that in a different tutorial on a different day. But so I'm just going to throw in some shade here. Throw in some shade. No tea, no shade. Sorry, I'm tired. And bring in the shade down towards the tip of the Alula feathers here. I'm going to do a very light layer of pen here. But wings don't have to be complicated. They come in all different shapes and sizes, so do bear that in mind. But go out and have a practice, because that's the best way to improve, is just to have a go. To start off by drawing things in different sections, just to make it easier for yourself. Do our primary converts. Paying attention to where the shaft and the bristles are. Shaft. Now, I am a massive feather collector. It's one of my... It's not so secret. It's not like a... What would you call it? Like a guilty pleasure, but I absolutely love feathers. So if you want to add to my collection, let me know. Especially if you're from a different part of the world that has some really cool feathers, I'd love to know. If you do you collect feathers as well? Like, is that your thing? Is that your jam? Or do you collect something else? This is very, very rough shading. extremely rough. The pigeons are cool because they can have quite a lot of interesting markings on their feathers. Like this one's got a black band, really. Goes in like this. Perhaps some more dark here. And fade from black. Cool. So that's your very basic pigeon. High-speed wing. Now, if this is popular, I probably will do another tutorial on, say, different types of bird wings, because that could be really helpful for people to understand. But in the meantime, go out and have a look at different birds and see what their wing shapes are, and see if you can work out what purpose their wings have. Now, there are good guides online. I do encourage people having a look, but here's my very simple tutorial on how to break down a bird's wing. So you've got your secondary section, your primary section, your primary converts, secondary converts, marginal converts, and a lula. Now, I hope that's been helpful. I thank you for your patronage, and I hope that you enjoy this tutorial, and I'll see you again for the next one. So, bye guys!